Greetings, comrades. My name is Gigantals, and today we're going to be I'll be covering the article that I ended up disagreeing with the fundamentalists about last time. My last video, I got on fundamentalist nerves. Yeah, I got on the nerves of the fundamentalist organization Answers in Genesis because they released an article in response to Pope Francis. In an interview, he said that they claimed that he said there would be another flood, like another great flood, like the flood in Genesis, and this video is basically going to be refuting that and actually explaining what Pope Francis meant by that statement. So on the 2nd of May, I've just got the actual article that this came in about, not the one by fundamentalists, but the actual original article concerning this matter. So on the 2nd of March this year, which is strange, it's going to be a bit older, Pope Francis released, there was a book released in which it was Pope Francis and an Italian priest called Father Marco Pozza. And they basically had this discussion, and this interview was published in a book. The book is called Dei Vizi e delle Virtù. That's Italian apparently for of vices and virtues. Now I'm not Italian, I don't know how to pronounce Italian words, so I'm sorry if I just offended every single Italian out there. But in this they discuss a bunch of things, and two quotes in question. Or the first one is most mortal in this case. Pope Francis says, "A great flood, perhaps due to a rise in temperature and the melting of glaciers. That is what will happen if we continue on the same path." And then a little bit later he says, "The wrath of God seeks to bring justice and to cleanse. The flood is a result of God's wrath, according to the Bible." Now, something we need to remember here is the context. Okay, when Answers in Genesis made the article about this, they did not include context, which I expect no better. I don't expect much from fundamentalists in that regard when it comes to context, because they usually use a lack of context to justify their sheer existence. I mean, they are cutting out 1,600 years of world history to justify themselves, which is enough said, really. Anyway, so concerning Pope Francis' words, compared to most popes, he's actually pretty environmental. He's more focused on the environment than most popes were. Okay, and so what he was saying here, the fundamentalists interpret it as a literal repeat of the flood of Genesis. And in the article, they then try and the first thing they do is they say this is wrong, and then try and justify why there would never be another flood of Genesis. And then they try and use that to say, okay, the Pope is wrong, and they leave everything else. They leave the comment section for people to call the Pope the Antichrist and that he should read the Bible and stuff more. Now, in that sense, they are right that there will never be another flood like Genesis, but they're very much wrong in how they interpret this. So just in case any fundamentalists out there who are going to think I'm ignorant on this matter, I am not ignorant about this. I am very much aware about the current flood model proposed by fundamentalists, and to a degree it does make sense. So for those of you who aren't acquainted when it comes to Facebook and arguing with fundamentalists, the current flood model as it stands is that the Earth used to be a lot warmer in the past. In the days of Noah, it used to be a lot warmer. And then meteors came in, they slammed to the Earth, and they started fracturing the plate. They started fracturing the Earth into tectonic plates. And then because the crust had cracked, now the pressure inside the Earth was changing, and so rocks started melting and releasing huge amounts of water, which led to massive storm systems developing, and that's where we get. It led to the flood basically. So it's not just simply a matter of it rained for 40 days or 40 nights, but rather there's a whole lot of geological and tectonic activity going on and stuff like that. I can tell you as a geologist that they are right in when it says that the majority of the Earth's water is not on the surface of the Earth, but actually in it. The mantle, okay, could be described, mineralogically speaking, as sopping wet in terms of how much water there is in the minerals there. You cannot have magma without water. It sounds strange, but it's true. And so what happened was, all the superheated water and stuff, it formed massive clouds and stuff, massive storm systems, including hypercanes, which, if any of you have seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow, a hypercane is like each one of those 3 storm systems that was over North America, Asia, and Europe, okay? And so, because of this, huge amounts of heat were lost to space, which helped cool down the planet over the period of the flood. And then as the flood went by, and more heat was lost, not only did it reach somewhat to a normal level, but it actually dropped below that because so much heat was being lost, and eventually ended up leading to the ice ages. Okay, so I am aware of how the flood model with fundamentalists works. Now, they are writing that there can never be another global flood again. Because obviously, God said that he will never flood. He will never flood the earth again. Okay, he never to try and destroy all flesh by a flood. Okay, and geologically speaking, that could never happen either, because the earth is simply too cold for something like that now. Even if global warming there was a runaway global warming event, there's no way the earth could ever warm up to that degree ever again. So the idea that there could be a repeat of the Genesis flood, no way. Now, the problem here is that on the Genesis, they're being very malicious in what they do. They're taking the Pope's quotes out of context. Now, Pope Francis does believe in a historical flood. Okay, let me just scroll down quickly. The flood is a historical account, archaeologists say, because they found evidence of a flood in the excavations, and they are right. There is evidence of a flood event. Okay, people may argue about whether it was local or global or whatever and provide evidence for that, but there is indeed evidence of a flood. That doesn't necessarily mean Pope Francis was just because Pope Francis accepts the fact that there was a historical flood doesn't mean that he was referring to another literal repeat of the flood of Genesis. And it relates to context again here. Okay, Pope Francis, he never said that he was referring to the Great Flood Genesis or the Flood Genesis. He said a great flood. Okay, and then he went on to later find perhaps due to a rise in temperature and the melting of glaciers, which is a completely different type of flood compared to Flood Genesis. Okay, if all the flood waters, or if all the ice and stuff on Earth melted, sea levels would rise maybe around 63 meters, which means I'm in big trouble. But the Flood Genesis, maybe the Earth used to be a little bit flatter then or something, not as many mountains or something like that. But not only the mountains, but also because there's a lot more water in the Earth. So with all the water coming out, the minerals of the Earth and the mantle and stuff, sea levels have actually risen much higher. Ocean basins, the mid-ocean ridges, because they're warmer, they rose, which meant that the ocean basins actually shrunk, which forced water into land. Well, a whole bunch of geological stuff here. But that type of flood is obviously very different. It's seismically induced, and it's seismically induced. The global flood of Genesis is seismically induced. This is due to the changing climate and the melting of water and the melting of the ice caps and tundra and glaciers and everything. Which means that looking at this quote in context, Pope Francis was not referring to a literal repeat of Genesis or the Genesis flood. Okay, what he was referring to here is literally just melting ice and the consequences that are on people. So that's Francis in Genesis is wrong immediately. The next thing is what Pope Francis is trying to say throughout this. Now, honestly, Genesis trying to make it seem like Pope Francis is trying to predict another flood of Genesis. But he actually wasn't. What he was trying to do was he was trying to point out the problem when it comes to the rising sea levels and everything. Because there is some people do debate about how big the Earth's population was before the flood and after and everything. Some people say there were millions of people before the flood. Some say hundreds of millions, even billions. Regardless how many there is, let's say maybe there were a billion people before the flood. Okay, that would mean there will be a billion people affected by the Genesis flood. When it comes to everyone on Earth at that point was affected. When it comes to rising sea levels today, everyone will also be affected, and even many more billions will be affected as well. Because if sea levels rise by a few meters, obviously places like the Maldives, the Netherlands, Belgium, Bangladesh, they're all going to be underwater. Okay, they're going to have most of the population have to move. Okay, Bangladesh is like 220 million people. Their country is gone if the sea level rises a few meters. And so all these countries are going to be affected by all these rising sea levels. Hundreds of millions displaced. And if sea levels rise, it's going to be more than just immediately, just people having to leave. It will also be people who aren't immediately affected by sea level rise. They'll have to make room for all the environmental refugees. They'll have to start finding new places to grow food and industrial sites and everything. Also, as Pope Francis said, a rise in temperature. If a rise in temperature occurs, that's going to lead to increased rate of desertification in other areas. Now, what Pope Francis is trying to say here is that if sea levels rise and there's an increase in temperature in Earth, everyone will be affected by this. Okay, billions of people will be affected. Okay, and it won't be a literal repeat of the flood, but the sea level rise of several meters will be a massive flooding event. It will be a massive inundation. Okay, even if the sea level, maybe even if they're taking account like the flat Earth at that point in time, and like before the flood Genesis. Maybe there were a couple of kilometers of water. Maybe the majority of the Earth was an average like under 2 kilometers of water or something, right? Okay. That's a huge amount of water. And whilst maybe 63 meters wouldn't sound too much compared to that, that's still a huge amount of water. That is a huge amount of... Okay, it's not obviously going to come as a giant wave like the day after tomorrow, but it's going to still be a huge flooding event, regardless of how slow it is. And that's what Pope Francis is trying to say here. He's trying to highlight the impact of rising sea levels in the situation and how that's going to be affecting billions of lives. It won't affect people the same way as the flood of Genesis, but it will indeed affect billions of lives. It will affect everyone, one way or another. Another thing to remember is that God promised never to flood the earth and destroy all flesh. That didn't mean that there would never be a flooding event. And if sea levels do rise 63 meters, I can guarantee you that not all the entire earth will be flooded. And I know this because I actually use flood maps. There's a site, I'll put it in the description, the link to it. It's actually a really good site. I use it for my geography assessment in college. It basically tells you how much of the earth will be drowned under this much of sea water, this high. If there's an increase of like 2 meters of sea level rise, then it'll show you how much of the earth is flooded, then 4, 6, whatever. You can put any number you want up to the entirety of Mount Everest being flooded. And you can also do the exact same, but also go the other way down, and then you can just see like what would be the last pool of water left on Earth, which is quite interesting. I found it quite a useful site. I'll put the link in the description, you guys can see that. Now, if 63 meters of water rises, well, it is 63 meters of the ocean, if the ocean rises by 63 meters, not all the Earth will be flooded, okay? Lots of land will be lost, lots of lives will be affected, but not all flesh will be destroyed. So even if Pope Francis was indeed predicting a great flood, not kilometers high, but still a great flood, which is 63 meters in our time would be considered a great flood, he would be right. It wouldn't drown all flesh, it wouldn't destroy all flesh, but it would be certainly a massive flood event that would affect billions of lives. And take into account plant and animal life, that'll probably be trillions of lives. Can you imagine what that would do to coral reefs? Yeah. Anyway, the point is, Pope Francis is not trying to predict a global flood like that of Genesis, okay? He isn't. He's just trying to highlight the impact of rising sea levels and how massive a flooding event that would be for all of us, okay? It is well answered in Genesis has gone wrong, and it shows blatantly their hatred for the Pope. I don't know why they changed. They went from being not, like I said, they were very liberally Protestant, like they weren't. They tried to focus away from theology. They said, we're going to work together. The Christians, we're just going to focus on, we're going to work together. The earth is young. God did this, God did that in this many days, whatever. But they weren't too theologically based, and now they are for some reason. And that's quite showing quite strongly. Even if they're publishing of the first, I think, if they publish if they publish a version of the article that I'm looking at, straight after this one came out, then they for some reason changed their views like almost a month later, which is very strange. What happened to them that they became so strongly Protestant? But it's backfired massively. It really has. They're going to lose a lot of support that way. Again, I'm surprised that CMI haven't blocked me for disagreeing with them on everything with the Shroud of Turin. And now CMI ever make a post about Shroud of Turin again, I'm going to basically tell them that while a book was published in 2013, which they ran like 5 different spectroscopy and different spectroscopy, Raman spectroscopy measurements techniques. Basically, 5 tests they did, found the average, and they found that average to be around 33. They found the Shroud of Turin to be dated around 33 BC plus took away 250 years, which does indeed prove the Shroud of Turin is actually a lot older than we think it is. Which, if they reject that, then they're gonna have to reject their dates for the carbon dating too, because no one takes the 1300 AD age for the Shroud of Turin seriously. No one takes that seriously. Anyone who's actually done their research, no. In fact, one of my biblical archaeology groups, there's a guy who actually worked on the Shroud of Turin. But the point is, when it comes to these fundamentalists, they like to take things out of context. I mean, again, the book I'm talking about, the one that actually proved the Shroud of Turin to be a lot older, that came out in 2013, and the article I was looking at when I found this out was from 2019. And the article concerning the flood and that Pope Francis mentioned, okay, a great flood, that came out early March, and they wrote a response quite soon after. But they also conveniently ignore context too, which actually backfires against them massively, because when you do research on it, you realize just how feeble the case they make with that article is, whatever the context it is, whatever the context that article's in. For instance, by taking the Pope's comments out of context, and then trying to make him look like he's an idiot and he doesn't read the Bible. All they've done is actually shown just how much they hate the Pope and how biased they are against him, which means that you need to take everything they say about him with a massive handful of salt. Not only that, but we also see that's not what he actually said. So we see them being malicious in purposely trying to twist the truth of people that, even though you disagree with them over theology, but agree with them scientifically, they will instead be malicious enough to try and change what someone, make it seem like the enemy said something completely scientifically different, so that they can try and make them look like an idiot themselves, right? So you try and demean what the other person is saying by twisting their words around. Along with in this way, CMI. I mean, how do you miss an article that is like 8 years old? The book is 8 years old, and they haven't even written responses. I mean, this article itself is 2 years old, and I'm gonna say, hey, don't publish another post about this until you answer this. They probably won't, though. To be honest, I have asked them quite certain things about carbon dating. I did try, and they never got back to me. Very strange. But that's something you gotta raise when it comes to fundamentalists. I don't hate fundamentalists. Okay, I don't. Fundamentalism as a theology, I laugh at. Okay, I find it heavily flawed. I don't like fundamentalism. Doesn't mean I can't at least try and maybe explain a few things to them, or at least try and understand what they're saying a bit better. Because if you are going to have dialogue with someone, it's important to actually understand what they're saying. Okay, and if I just try to mock them and treat them as everyone else tries to treat them, then I certainly would not be acting as a Christian. I can tell you that. It's very strange. They are right. Fundamentalists are right when they deal with atheists. They usually say, it's strange how the atheists we deal with are usually more aggressive than literally anyone we've ever dealt with, because they'll deal with Muslims and Buddhists and stuff, any religion. Okay, sometimes a bit of conflict, but a little bit. But when it comes to with atheism, these fundamentalists say the atheists treat us horribly. They're usually the most aggressive out of all of them, which I guess stands true, even if you're not a fundamentalist, but just for Christians in general, really. When it comes to arguing with people, I have found that it's usually the atheists that are the most aggressive. I mean, sure, the fundamentalists and Adventists, like Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff, they can be quite insulting, especially the couple I've dealt with. The Muslims I've argued with are quick to leave when they realize that they aren't going to win this, but it's usually the atheists that are quite aggressive. But I end up usually running them into the ground, so... Respectfully. When I say run them into the ground, I mean I basically, if we were in a race, I'll make them push their car to the point it just falls apart, literally, they're like in the cartoons where they're just sitting there in their chair holding their steering wheel, and then the car just slides to a halt, or just as the car's just like rolling away from, just like there's a wheel there, a door there, a window there, just like sat there. That's effectively what I do when it comes to running people into the ground in a debate. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to do that with Answers in Genesis, because admittedly made my words a bit firm against him, but that doesn't mean that they were wrong. Okay, when it comes to dealing with something as unreasonable as fundamentalists sometimes, especially in the context where they're going to, especially in the context, ironically enough, of them removing context from someone else to try and make that person like an idiot, don't be prepared for a balanced argument. Okay, Answers in Genesis, I've already said about them. This is the second time I disagreed with them. They didn't answer the first time, and they didn't even bother this time. No surprise, as their argument for 66 books in the Bible is a laugh. I've gone off on a tangent, haven't I? That's something I've always noticed. Like when I went to school, my teachers would say the problem with Gigantos here, obviously my real name. Obviously, the problem with Gigantos here. They say this to my parents. Mr. Gigantos here. The problem is that he can write brilliant. He can write really well, but he always goes off on a tangent. Like, I'm writing an essay and I always go off on a tangent. Like, it's brilliant how I always do this. I've managed to restrain myself now, but I went off on a very much of a tangent in this episode, talking about CMI and the Shroud of Turin and their missing context and everything for that. But the point of this video is that Pope Francis is not referring to a literal repeat of the flood of Genesis. Okay, he wasn't. He was referring to a great flood event, which would be the result of rising sea levels, which would indeed be a great flood event. Not that it would be exactly pleasant to watch, but it would be a certainly catastrophic flood event. That doesn't mean it would be the catastrophic flood event, which would be reserved for the flood alone, due to the sheer ferocity of what happened. I mean, if I could see what had happened during the flood, like as Fundamentalists described, that would be the greatest geological event in history to watch. That would be brilliant just to watch the meteor slam into the earth, the rapid plate tectonic movement of the volcanoes going exploding everywhere, just the thousands of miles of active fault zones. That would be the best disaster movie in history. Unfortunately, films like Noah have completely and utterly destroyed the reputations of that. Do not watch the film Noah, okay? It is terrible. I could eat alphabet soup and throw up a better biblical movie than that. That was a terrible movie. So that's the saying, what this video said. Answers in Genesis were wrong. Pope Francis was not referring to a literal repeat of the flood, he was referring to a massive flooding event, not the massive flooding event, which wouldn't contradict the God promising not to wipe out all flesh on earth as promised by the rainbow in the sky in Genesis. Answers in Genesis are malicious, in purposely cutting out context to try and make their enemy look like an idiot. Instead, all they've done is just make the article writing question is making something like a numbskull for purposely cutting out of context when you can just literally look up the actual words of Pope Francis and see that he literally took him out of context and completely misunderstood what he said and everything and what he was trying to say. I mean, Answers in Genesis can talk as much about as they want about, we can identify where in the Bible, where Moses wrote in the Hebrew historical narrative and the Hebrew literature narrative. But if the people writing the articles can't even distinguish between the Italian historical narrative and the Italian literature narrative, a living language it's people still talk it, not that people don't speak Hebrew, but the Hebrew back then spoke a little bit different to one now. But if they can't even distinguish a difference between Italian, literal Italian, metaphorical Italian, figurative Italian, and all that, then you probably should stop writing and actually go back to school, because they're going to make a massive mistake along the way. Just wait until they get to the English language. That's even worse. And when they make mistakes like that, they're going to be not only shooting themselves in the foot, they're going to harpoon themselves to the foot with an explosive harpoon. It's going to be absolute chaos for them. That's all for this video before I continue going more off on tangent. So like this video, please do give a like, please do share my videos, please do comment what you think of them, videos you want me to do. Please subscribe to my channel so you can see more content. Please anything else so you can keep updated with my video releases. Next episode, I won't do the Shroud Turin episode series next episode because it's quite lengthy and still got exams going on. So give me some time, but I will do my Shroud Turin episode. I'll do a summary of what it is, and then I'll do a summary of counter arguments against all the arguments out there, and I'll completely annihilate Creation Ministries International's take on it. But that'll be for then. So see you next video, comrades. Until then.